Hey guys, and welcome to part 2 of my personal experience of my breakthrough tournament that took me from a 2,200-ish national rating to a national rating over 2,300 at the age of just 15. And also the tournament that took me from a FIDE rating of 2,152 to a FIDE rating well over 2,200. Now, if you haven't seen part 1, I have put the link in the description below so you have the context. However, this is also going to be a fully self-sufficient video, as I know that many of you who are watching this are in that stage where you are maybe at the 2,000-ish level, maybe a bit above that, maybe a bit below that, but you want to know how I got from a rating of 1967 national rating to a national rating of 2,303 in exactly 1 year. And that's exactly the story that I'll be sharing with you in this video, based on these games I played in the second half of the 2008 Australian Championship, where I went from having a very good performance to having a completely breakthrough event, as it were. So if you are enjoying this video, I would love for you to support it by smashing that like button. It really helps me to achieve my mission of helping over 500 chess experts, that is players rated above 2,000, to become chess masters. And if you're not at that level yet, then I would love to help you get there as quickly as possible through these videos, so that when you've had that experience of those results, you'll be ready and qualified to work with me and take that progress to the next level. Good or good. Alright, and make sure to subscribe as well, by the way, if you are new to the channel in particular. That'll be the easiest way for you to improve your chess. So let's go to the round 7 game. So for those who just don't care about part 1 and say, I just want to see you beat the international master and draw with the grandmaster and this sort of thing. Well, I was on a score of 3.5 out of 6 at this point in the tournament. I had won all of my white games, and I had lost my first 2 black games to 2,300 plus rated players, but then I also had a draw with a player around my own rating in round 6, where I was winning, but I messed up and it was only a draw. So in round 7, I was playing with the white pieces against the English international master Gary Lane. At the time, this game was rated 2,412, but at his peak, he was actually about 2,500-ish strength. He beat some very strong players like Mickey Adams and Nigel Short and other very famous English champs who broke to 2,700. So, you know, you could say one of the many players who kind of deserved to become a GM, but just the life circumstances didn't work out that way somehow. In any case, he normally played the King's Indian, actually. This was his main defense that he was playing against d4, but maybe he wasn't that comfortable against the same-ish. He felt that, you know, maybe I would be able to set some problems here, because it is something I had prepared quite a lot before the game, as it were, using some Lazo Hazai files that were shared with me by my coach at the time, Grandmaster Ian Rogers, and, well, it definitely helped me to get my theoretical preparation understanding to that next level, to have the opening files of a really top chess theoretician at the time, or actually Lazo Hazai is still a top chess theoretician today. But anyway, the game went e6, and you know, when I was let's say, when I was at that level of like 1967 to 2,100, I have to admit that this Nimzo and the line I was playing, the Rubinstein, was one I kind of struggled with a little bit at the time. Looking back, I think that the weakest area of my white opening repertoire from, let's say, late 2006, kind of early 2007, was definitely the Nimzo Indian. And it's because there are a lot of different types of positions you kind of have to learn to really master these lines with white, like with e3. For example, one line I struggled with a lot was after b6, this line where they play, I believe it's bishop a6 at this moment, where they just play to go for a light squared strategy. And I was normally playing the move a3 at that time, but after take, and d5, well, I was not completely comfortable, I guess, like with these positions with the, you know, pressure against the pawn and trying to trade off my bishop. So I'd end up with like a bad bishop versus a good knight is kind of the idea. I think I remember later on in 2007 I did work on this a bit with Ian, and I kind of realized later on that knight g3 is actually quite a good alternative, where you kind of sack this pawn on d5 in some cases, but you also get some nice compensation. Like, let's say, one example would be bishop a3 was a move I studied back then, where, you know, you sack the pawn, but you make it hard for him to get the king castled and this sort of thing. So I kind of did a bit of research and got a bit more comfortable in those positions that previously I'd had some pretty embarrassing losses to, quite frankly. But in this game, Gary played the main line of bishop d3, d5, so obviously I'm playing as white, him as black, so knight f3, c5. And yeah, at the time after castles, the line that was kind of giving me the most headaches before was this line with dc4 and the, I think it's called the Parma variation, not for chicken Parma, but the player Bruno Parma, with knight b to d7. Just kind of playing very flexibly. Maybe you'll go b6, maybe you'll go a6, b5, and bishop b7, and go for this flexible setup. But I'd done some work on this subsequently for this tournament, realizing it was kind of a weakness of mine from some chess games I played in Blitz on the Internet Chess Club, and I remember I'd prepared this move queen b3, which was like not the main line, but kind of a interesting surprise weapon, and where black has to be a little bit precise to kind of, deal with the plan of like rook d1 and pushing with d5 and this kind of thing. So it was a line I had done some work on and kind of knew better than pretty much anyone else in Australia probably at that time, where I'd used the ECO and also those Hazai files, but kind of added some of my own ideas as well from my own analysis with the computer and my own fork as well. At that time, the engines weren't that strong, but so that's why I was also thinking about a lot from the human perspective as well, yeah, to make sure I kind of was evaluating positions correctly in a sense. But in the game, my opponent played the old main line of knight c6, but with a little bit of a twist, where, nowadays the main trend actually is to take and go dc5 and play this kind of IQP position, like kind of a Nimzo with cards reversed in a funny sort of way, but at that time, a3 was the main line, and it was the move that I had a lot of experience with. I'd had a lot of games in 2007, where I'd played in a club championship, and actually this was the North's Club Championship, where at the time I played it, I was rated like 2,000 or so. So I was sort of one of the, let's say, probably one of the middle seeds in the field, maybe lower seeds if anything. But because the games were 1 week, basically I was able to really prepare very seriously for those games. I was able to look at what my opponents were playing to really deeply revise my openings and make sure I actually remembered them. And a shift from like, rather than just, flicking through a book quickly, like blindfolded and, remembering what I could, instead of actually trying to remember and understand positions, made a big difference to my chess level. And that was a big reason why I was able to actually become, even to this day, still the youngest ever North's Chess Club champion. I think my score was 8 out of 11, if I remember correctly. I forgot whether it was 8 out of 11 or 8.5 out of 11, because I remember like having like 2 losses and 1 draw. Actually, I would have to check. I honestly forgot my score, but I remember it was around that kind of range of 8 to 9 out of 11. And yeah, I went on to just gain like 80 rating points or something. It was just completely, on FIDE rating as well, by the way, that's just completely nuts. So that was like a big opportunity, and definitely very grateful to the North's Chess Club, of course, for giving me these opportunities to play these strong players every week and get that experience, and to, of course, boost my rating in the process of that. So anyway, usually in those tournaments they were playing like dc4 and this sort of old, Zurich kind of main line, where black goes e5, and I prepared some ideas like bishop b2 and h3 was kind of the system I liked to play at that time, just kind of keeping the tension, stopping bishop b4, and if they go e4, you can often like hit them in the center later. I had very good results with these lines, and the engine even now confirms that White's got chance of advantage in these positions as well, thanks to the bishop pair. But in the game he played queen c7, and this was another point where I played a little bit originally, where after takes, I think the main line at the time was to play a4, and to try to get the bishop to a3, but even there, black was still sort of having a reasonable position. So my logic at the time was, well, if I'm going to be playing, let's say, something that's probably going to be equal for black regardless, why not put my own little creative spin on it? And so I'd spent some time working on the move bishop b2 in preparation for this game, and to a lesser extent in preparation for the tournament, as an IMSO was one of the areas I really worked on a lot from both the white and the black perspective. You may remember from part 1, I already played the IMSO in the game in round 4, as it were, as black. And okay, it's true that nowadays, like, if you go to c4, well, it's known from modern Rogozin theory that these sort of structures are very promising for black. The bishop on b2, of course, is very inept on b2, right? And with white not really being able to get in an easy e4 break, it means black is just doing very well. That being said, I feel like this is probably not the right place to go into a super deep analysis of the game. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you the moves that were played without too many comments, so you can kind of feel how my opponent was in a position that was very uncomfortable, and how my greater knowledge of studying these positions and analyzing before even though my conclusions were not particularly accurate, still gave me an unfair advantage, allowed me to outplay a player who at that time was quite a lot stronger than me, objectively speaking. But somehow I just got him into a position that I knew better. So I played this creative queen e1, like saying, okay, you can double my pawns, but then I get this like g-file play and I stop knight e4. Computer says that black is still better in this position, and it says that for many of the moves, but somehow black just never really came up with this right plan of, you know, playing to trade off my bishop. I think if he does this plan in pretty much any version, even perhaps immediately, I think that black is just significantly better. Because with a bishop, I'm never really going to get an e4 in a good version in principle. He's just got too many pieces covering it, yes or yes. But after rook a d8, well, slowly I was able to start to make sense of my setup, yeah? You know, rook c1, just putting a rook opposite the queen. Not a great move because he can go c4, but somehow both of us had this strategic misunderstanding that c4 is a bad move because I can go f3, e4 once the center is closed. But modern engines have shown that, you know, you don't have to be this dogmatic in your assessment, especially when you've got moves like knight e7 to, in a sense, correct the earlier mistake and force the trade of the of white's good bishop to get the typical Nimzo situation of good knight versus bad bishop scenario, yeah? But we had h6, I played queen to e2. Again, these moves are not absolutely most precise, but there sort of was an interesting moment where, you know, after b6 and bishop a3, like, now my position is actually starting to improve to a point where I'm not worse anymore and where I could actually be better if my opponent doesn't find the right way to handle this tension between the pawns. I think quite a useful point to, I guess, understand here is that actually dc5 is not maybe as big of a threat as it looks, because it does also kind of weaken the structure, at least a little bit structurally. And so if black plays a move like knight e4 and just kind of defends the pawn and, you know, tries to stop me getting an f3 because, you know, a3 has stopped me playing f3 so easily, then yeah, in all fairness, black is probably still doing okay. I mean, also when you trade these knights, you're also, like, let's say if I play a move like rook fe1 just for argument's sake, we can sort of see how if black were to play knight takes d2 at some moment, not necessarily immediately, but as an example, you can see, you know, how that knight is then able to come to c4 much more easily when the knight was traded. There's little strategic understandings like that, which I have to admit did not really occur to me during the game. I was still thinking, like, how do I execute my plan and maneuver the pieces, and, well, even though it was not the absolute optimal way to think about the position, it still proved to be good enough, because when my opponent did finally play the move c4, we could say that it's probably at almost the worst possible time, because now, I mean, well, he just doesn't really have the time to bring the bishop out to trade it off, and because of that, I'm able to go for the a4 break quite quickly, and we see that come up in the game as well, where after making some preparatory moves like knight e7, f3, queen f2, you know, finally, you know, now I've got out of the way of any e4, knight f4 shenanigans, that finally I'm ready to go e4, and then when I do play e4, it's just very, very strong. Actually, this game, it reminded me of something a little bit funny that I want to share at the end, that actually, you know, but as part of my preparation for this tournament, maybe 3 to 6 months before that, probably 3 months more precise, I actually went through this book, Find a Checkmate by Gary Lane, and it's kind of funny that near the end I was actually able to use my my study of this book. Like, most of the exams were pretty easy for me at the time, but there were a few that challenged me and really helped me to improve my calculation to a much higher level as such. Now, sometimes even the simple puzzles can help you to improve, to make sure you're kind of seeing all the easy things right away. Because sometimes, like, that's how you win in chess. Just keep it simple and don't do anything really, really stupid and punish you when your opponent does do something silly. So rook e3, that's just a good preparatory move to clear the way for my rook. So a6, well, I played rook c to e1. Okay, computer is saying other moves like e5 are a lot better, but I guess I was a little reluctant to give the d5 square to a knight right away. And okay, his tree has moves like knight d3, you can try to mix up the game and create some swindling chances, but instead he played more passively with knight g6, and the result was that now I realize that, okay, e5 is just so tempting, like, I can't not play it, right? You know, and it's all a point like sort of egoism in chess, where sometimes we say, oh, I don't want to play it because I'm giving him an outpost, but at the same time, look at how much white's pieces are improving in the process. This is the much more important factor. After knight df4, I played the move knight e4, take, rook takes e4 to attack the knight. To knight d3, I actually didn't even take that knight because I didn't want to give him counterplay with queen c4 or queen c6 as such. So I just played queen f5 and kind of left him stewing in his own juices a little bit. So the game went queen c6, and I'm even today quite happy with the accuracy of calculation I showed in converting my advantage to a win, because before this tournament, this was definitely something that was a weakness of mine, converting a big advantage to a winning advantage into a win with precise calculation. But as I said, I'd put some work into it, and with e6, I was able to overwhelm the defense of the pawn and the knight decisively. And here after knight h8 is where I was able to use my study of FIDE checkmate by Gary Lane. I mean, there are a lot of winning moves, so I think I would have won even without studying the book, to be fair, but I kind of saw from this that rook takes g7 is just a hammer blow. And after king g4, g7 I should say, rook g4, this is the whole point to, storm the barricades, to quote Larry Christensen. And then after knight g6, queen f7, king f8, h8, I saw that I have a very nice intermediate check of queen to f6 to ensure that, everything comes with check and mate, and so my opponent resigned. Granted, I spent a lot of time talking about this game, but I think that of all the games I played in this tournament, this was probably my best game of the event, and I think it also really shows very strongly the kind of evolution in my game from, let's say, where I was at kind of that 2-150-ish level, but sort of not really converting my advantages into wins against these higher-rated players in general. Like, I remember, for example, the tournament I played before this one was called, the Right Eastwood Open, and I had this really great start to the tournament. It was around the point where I started actually played a Grandmaster level in Blitz and Bullet on chess.com, just from, playing it so much against these strong players and really practicing my openings over and over again until I really had mastered them, on the practical level as well as the theoretical, right? But then that tournament, I remember, I started with, I had 3 wins against lower rated players in the first 3 rounds, I believe, if I remember correctly. Then I drew with, I am Andras Toff with the black pieces with the Bogo Indian. I think I might have mentioned this for part 1 as well. But then I also had this very nice win. I won against a player around my own rating at the time. It was on the Australian Women's Olympiad team. Then I also, beat a 2-3-80 or nearly 2-5 rated player. I just caught him out in an opening trap I'd prepared in the English defense, with e6 and b6, and basically won almost purely of opening knowledge. But then in round 7, I got to this point where I was basically half a point ahead of the field, because the main contender, Junta Ikeda, who I was playing the last round, he had lost to Igor beforehand, but I'd drawn with Andras, so basically winner of this game wins the tournament. And I remember I was in this weird situation where I knew my position was quite a bit better, but I was torn because I hadn't really been in a situation of actually playing for the first place in an actual open tournament before. It was my first experience. And I didn't know I'm better, do I just play solely and go for the draw, or do I just try to finish him off and win? Somehow I tried to do a bit of both and it just didn't really work, and he ended up outplaying me later in the game, making position very sharp and complex and kind of, taking control as it were, and he ended up winning the tournament. I was man, I was so close. I just had to, not lose this last round game after doing so brilliantly against these, 2-300 and 2-400 rated players, and then to lose, to a player that time I was close to my rating. It hurt a bit, but it also motivated me a lot more to see how close I was to getting those tournament victories, right? Anyway, there's a bit of a long explanation, but I'm sure you appreciate the story, and maybe you're going through a similar challenge as well and can relate on some level. Now, this game again that I played in round 8 against Tomek Ray, who I think he was not yet a FIDE master at that time, but he was rated 2283, so he's essentially that FM strength. And of course, as you've been following my mission, you'll already know that this is my mission to help, 500 plus chess experts, that is 2000 plus rating, to get to that master level, be it 2200 plus or 2300 plus in the year of 2022. And I have put a link in the description if you are at that level and want to reach out to me directly. But of course, only serious students. I don't want to, waste my time with people who are not, serious about it. But yeah, you can see a little bit of a move order point that with Queen C2, I'm kind of saying, well, okay, you can play the Stonewall if you want to, but I'm keeping the option of playing Bishop F, D3, Knight E2, and maybe going for a more flexible setup where I might be able to push F3 and E4. And I guess my opponent didn't like that because he decided to transpose back into the semi-Slav, as we see here. But, I'd already won with G4 against Igor Goldenberg, and I could tell that my opponent was not fully prepared for this transposition. You may recall that Goldie, as he was nicknamed back then, was playing B5. He did the Moran approach against me. Tomek played this move Queen E7, trying to kind of keep his options open to prepare E5, but maybe keep B5 in reserve. But, and while it's not losing, I don't think it's a particularly great move somehow. I played the move E4, computer said just go Bishop D2 and develop normally, but I kind of was at this had this little bit of a weakness. Okay, sometimes it was a strength, sometimes it was a weakness, where if my opponent played a move that I kind of knew was not as good, I would try to punish it quite directly. And I kind of knew that this e4 and like g5 was kind of a thing. Well, in a way, it kind of is quite similar to a Moran type setup, e4, e5. Maybe these moves would be thrown in normally. But there is this difference that, the knight is a bit misplaced on h5. And, okay, I've got g5 in to maybe go for a kingside attack if they castle short. So I played bishop e3. Okay, computer is saying bishop e2 is better, so that after ed4, knight d4, you're gaining a tempo on the knight. And, okay, it's a good point, but it just didn't occur to me in the game, I have to say. Like, at that time, I wasn't super strong with the prophylactic kind of element. My opponent played knight e5, and, this was a pretty decent move by him. I have to say that, my play was a little bit too direct, and the result was that basically after this, I played bishop g4, wanting to, keep some imbalance and, not lose my bishop, as it were. Because I realized a continuation like queen d1, for example, is actually quite unclear. Like, yeah, on the one hand, his knight on h5 is trapped, but after this, like, he's getting pretty good compensation, right? After bishop e6, because my extra pawn is not really that useful for creating a passed pawn, and his bishops are very much competitive with my knights, including if I trade knight for bishop, his bishop is better than my knight in that position. So I felt that the kind of position would be easy for him to play, and this is where a little bit of the practical component comes in, like, not just what is the engine's first line, but, like, when it's a close decision, like, what is going to set the most difficulties for my opponent and be the easier for me to play, and I concluded that bishop g4 would serve that interest, because at least I can go h3, and I've got a fast development, and, I have easy play, let's say, in this kind of position. But, of course, objectively, black should be fine, and, okay, in the end, I did manage to actually outplay my opponent in an endgame, where I remember I analyzed it with him afterwards, like, again, it's a thing, like, with the chess wall, like, I know that many of you might be thinking, like, things, I don't know, like, it's hard to get the right help, this sort of thing, or maybe another example would be, people don't want to analyze the game anymore, or, like, I don't want to waste, grandmaster's time by asking a question, but what I found in my own experience is that people are actually surprisingly helpful if you ask for help. I do, like I said, answer people's questions, like, on Messenger in the Facebook groups from time to time. So, it's the idea, like, learning how to ask for the right help is a skill in itself. And, well, to be fair, you can actually practice it by, getting on the Messenger with me and, and asking your question, because that helps me to help you more, right, with my different programs and such that I have. But anyway, later on in the game, I'm going to fast forward ahead a bit to... Yeah, I think this point was where the game started to shift a little, because actually at this point his position is better. He kind of had outplayed me a bit in the earlier phase. But one of Tomek's weaknesses, I remember, and this might be interesting for those who are kind of on that cusp of master, but maybe just need one good tournament, or, maybe you're a couple of games away, but you had a bad tournament and you're trying to get back up again. If that's your situation, then that might help to kind of realize that, Tomek's weakness was that he was playing too slowly. So yeah, he's got a better position, but he had virtually no time on the clock. Like, he was playing just on that 30-second increment, whereas I had, I think 30 minutes or so, if I remember correctly. I don't remember exactly, but it was somewhere like the 20 to 35-minute range, as it were. I think 28 minutes, if I remember correctly. But he played this move bishop b3, which is just a little bit too forcing. If you think, well, what is White's main idea? He probably wants to go, say, knight c5 and try to attack this bishop. Knight f6 maybe, but I don't really see it as a real threat. Knight f7, rook h8, and the pawn, you take it back here. It's not that super hard to see if you actually look deeper. But a move like b6 would just be quite annoying, right? And, if you just play knight f6, it's kind of like... If I do play, it's kind of like, so what? Take rook h8, and black will resolve the weakness of h7 with h6. Then my structure is very weak, and black is simply a lot better, I think. If he plays this, there's a good chance he would at least... If not win the game, at the very least, he would not lose the game. Let's put it like this. But after bishop b3, I start to get a little bit more confident. I saw, okay, I've been studying Van Pelle's endgame tactics, as I said in part 1. So I kind of understood, okay, knight c5, let's play for a little initiative. And yeah, somehow my opponent just self-destructed a little bit. I mean, bishop d5 is still okay, but rook d1, and suddenly, you have to be a tiny bit careful you're not missing some sort of trick, and... Well, they went king c8, like, still the position is about equal, but just little micro mistakes, like, for example, king c8 instead of king c7, cd5 instead of rook d5, it's just making it slightly harder for him to hold it from a practical level. And I've forgotten exactly how the game went, but I do have the notation in front of me, so still position is very equal, but he's kind of low on time, and I'm wanting to try to create some chances. Okay, admittedly a move like knight f2 would be interesting, but I guess the idea didn't occur to me because I played knight e4 and tried to blockade instead. Yeah, but then some weird things happened with this game, actually. Like, king e6, for example, is just really asking for, the knight d4 check, and, if you play a move like knight f5 to try to cover it, well, maybe I can go rook c7 and try to, inch in this kind of way, and it's actually pretty bad for black, this kind of position, if I play rook c6, because he's got this weak pawn, and, well, it's hard to explain. Like, I can just go knight d4, trade the knights, and somehow it's very hard for him to defend all his weaknesses at once, because his king is cut off by my rook. So probably his best move is actually just to admit the mistake, just go back to king d7, and okay, white is much better because my knight got this monster outpost with the time he wasted, but it's not losing for black, let's put it like this. And actually, to be fair, maybe it's even not that bad for black necessarily, because I do have to consider like rook h8 and this sort of plan for counterplay, so maybe I should be more patient and play a move like b4, but in that case, my edge is definitely not a significant one at the very least. But instead he played a move rook c8, and that's a very committal decision to make, just a couple of moves before the time control, and it sort of, I guess, reflects a little bit of a lack of practicality, because after take... I mean, if you think about it, knight endings are like pawn endgames, yes, because, you can't triangulate with a knight, you're moving from a dark square to a light square, or a light square to a dark square, and back and forth, so it means that's why it's a lot like a pawn endgame in terms of the Zugzwang component, as it were. So I play h4, and okay, I kind of had got to the time control, which gave me plenty of time to realize that, this position is probably winning or very close to it with correct play. Although h4 is probably a little bit of a careless move, I'm not quite sure why I played it. Because the reason it's dubious is if I move my knight away, he has knight f5 counterplay, whereas, if I just played, let's say, b4 and just kind of, went for b5, knight c6 directly, that would just win. Luckily for me, my opponent also didn't come up with the best defense. He played this move of a5. Actually, it's probably not fair to say. Like, a5 probably is as good as anything else. But yeah, I played sort of this b3 move, kind of wanting to just keep the options open. Granted, a4 is probably the better way to play it. Just go knight b5, knight d6. But then he plays knight g8, and okay, I go knight to b5, trying to sort of, eke my way in. Granted, computer says that this is a big mistake, and that what I should have done is played king e3 and b4 and gone for f5, that this was the way to kind of create additional weaknesses in black's position, and that might actually be winning for white with best play. But okay, I didn't see this at the time. Like, admittedly, I had studied a lot of endgames, but I hadn't had a huge amount of endgame practice, if that makes sense. So my practical skills were a little bit lacking, you could say, but somehow it all worked out for me because my opponent had been sort of suffering from the pressure of a long kind of defense. And so rather than playing a move like h5 and, making sure that he can cover his bases like knight d6, for example, he can actually play this very tricky move, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe you can pause here and see if you can find a defense for black. So the answer is that you can actually play the move knight e7. Okay, it turns out technically knight king 6 and king f5 gives enough counterplay to draw as well. But this is kind of the easy way because, well, knight e7, if you're getting king e6, you're covering knight c8, right? But if knight f7, the point in... I think actually I did see this in the game, like, after I made my move, but he didn't see it. Like, I was just kind of sitting there, hoping, okay, I'm just going to, pretend like I'm just winning and, kind of psych him out a little bit, and it kind of worked. So if he plays knight f5, the problem is that my knight is just trapped at this point. And I'm also having to deal with knight takes h4, which is why knight h8 is not really an answer. So right now I would kind of have to bail out with something like knight d6, hoping that he, plays knight... Oh, actually, even if he does play knight d6, that ending is still a draw anyway, but, he could also play knight h4 if he wants to, and, there's no way in a million years I win this position as white, because I need to keep the knights on the board so that his connected passed pawns don't just run up and just kill my king, in a sense. So a draw would be a fair outcome here, but instead he played knight e7, kind of maybe mentally checking out a little bit, and I realized that I can now revert back to the move knight f4 and kind of revert back to winning plan. Okay, computer says that king d4 is a lot better again, going for some knight e6, king c7 stuff, but I kind of, remembered the Shereshevsky principle, like, do not hurry, and, that Soviet technique of repeating position once to go back to, where you should go before, and, I do think that was actually a big reason I won this game, is that I was able to admit when I made a mistake and retract the steps as I needed, whereas my opponent was not psychologically able to do so. And that's, I think, maybe one reason why, even though technically he's losing here anyway, like, knight f5 is just a very, to my mind, elementary mistake at this level, because after take, and king d4. I'm honestly not sure what my opponent missed. I think he just missed that I can play a4, but frankly, I have a lot of winning moves at this point, and, it's just a zugzwang. And finally, after a little kind of rage quit style, f6, ef6, h5, f7, take, finally he resigned, because, it's obvious that he is absolutely dead lost. So, this was, a game that, again, as you can see, I'm taking a little bit more time to go through these games, because I think that it's worth pausing to kind of actually reflect on what were the lessons that I learned from my, training and my practice before the event, and to see how I applied it in the games, and also, the areas where I was actually, making mistakes, because I think that's important for you to learn from as well. Like, I understand it, for this level of 2000 plus, we have these slightly different situations and slightly different strengths and weaknesses, right? For example, at this time, I knew that the King's Indian defense as black didn't suit my style whatsoever, and that Nimzo and Bogo Indian was a much better fit. For you, maybe it's the opposite, where you really like that more, long-term strategic close battles in the King's Indian with great chance to attack. In the end, it comes down to knowing yourself, and, sometimes to really know yourself very well, it actually requires you to have a coach to really guide you through that process, because they have that outside perspective, seeing the things that you're not able to see when you're in the moment in your, from your own situation. Does that make sense to you guys? Cool. Alright, so let's continue on. And this next game, I think I'm going to just focus on the end game. This was a game I actually played against Stephen Solomon in round 9. And this was a big turning point, because actually at this point, Stephen was 1 point ahead of all the other Australians. So the way Australian Championship title works is that obviously it's only for eligible Australian players. So it happened in this tournament that, my opponent in round 10, Grandmaster Dejan Antic of Serbia, he went on to win this tournament. I think he won with 8.5 out of 11, if I remember correctly. It was a long time ago, but I think this is correct. And, well, at this time, Stephen was a point ahead of all the other Australians. So it's if I win this game with black, of course, to win against a player 300 points above me, it sounds extremely ambitious, but the thing is, I was on a roll. I just won 2 games in a row against, a 2-400 player and a nearly 2-300 player, so I had massive confidence going into this game, and you're going to actually feel that, with some of the moves in the game as well. And also, there was kind of what's the other way to say it? I was just feeling really good. That's just the way I would put it. When you get very confident, you start to kind of play better as well, right? But in any case, I also want to just very quickly touch on the opening. I was playing the Sveshnikov still as my defense to E4, so, I didn't, completely change my whole opening repertoire for the event, but I just sort of fixed the biggest problems, which were the King's Indian with black and the, Rossalimo. I fixed this before the event, as you saw in part 1 of this video already. And, well, he played this very positional line of the Sveshnikov, he kind of knew from looking at my game, I was going to play Sveshnikov, but I prepared a slightly different variation. Because in the past, what I'd done is I'd normally played the old main line with Bishop G5 and castles, which admittedly didn't have the best reputation at that time, for reasons that are outside scope of the video. But I remember that for this tournament, I'd actually prepared a different weapon by using a yearbook survey. Because in the past, the way I would look at these New and Chess yearbooks and these other chess periodicals, I'd kind of just flick through them, visualize it in my head. I would read the 1 or 2 page description of the survey, just overviewing the theory, but I wouldn't really go through the full games because there were just so many of them, and I was kind of a bit intimidated by the level of depth of analysis, I guess. But I felt it wasn't maybe that relevant for my level, which in me was a bit of a limiting belief in retrospect. Because when I did start to go for these surveys quite seriously from about, let's say, mid-2007 is when I kind of started, well, I noticed that my understanding of position just improved so much, and it was also around that time my blitz skill improved a lot. Because when I was getting those positions on the board, I already knew what the plans were and the ideas and the moves that I should play in different situations, whereas my opponents in general were figuring it all out over the board, yeah? And actually, I just remembered something as well, kind of funny, from around that time, just to give you an idea of how much I tried to find time for my chess, because, if you think about it, I know there's so many people, where they say, oh, I don't have time to improve my chess, or they're oh, I have a job, I have a family to look after, I have this, and, at some point, it sort of becomes excuses there, you're sort of coming up with a good reason so you don't feel bad about the fact that you're not a chess master yet. But, there's no reason to feel bad about it. I mean, everyone is on a different stage in this journey, and if this mission of becoming a chess master is important enough to you, you're going to find a way. I don't care what your situation is, you're going to find a way if it's important enough to you. This is just a simple principle of life in a sense. So, to give you an example of that, I remember that, one thing that I did was I actually was skipping Wednesday sports, or more precisely, I actually had got, or rather my mum more precisely had gotten permission from the principal at the time for me to actually, instead of going to the Wednesday sport, to use that time to actually travel to, my coach Ian Rogers' place and have that 3 hours of lessons each week. Another, less extreme example was actually, I remember that, I had these yearbooks that Ian had loaned to me, and, these really old ones, and the thing is, because I had to give them back in, a week, I was like, okay, I got to get through as much of this as possible, so, the kind of, limited time of having it actually kind of motivate me to stay long, and actually, okay, I have to actually get through the whole book, otherwise it's what was the point of loaning me the book if I wasn't going to read it, It's kind of that accountability that really took my pyramid to another level. And so one thing I did was, 1 week where I had, a lot of exams or a lot of assignments, I actually was using the lunchtime, I had some lunchtime where I would just set myself up in, some empty classroom. I'd have, a chessboard, and I would just, go through, the games in this yearbook as such, really building up my understanding. Actually, I can't remember, because I can't remember, what girls I sort of liked at the time, but of course this is not really relevant for the, for this video, right? Though I will say, actually, when I did get more confident talking to girls, it did actually improve my chess confidence as well, so maybe there is some small correlation. But okay, these kind of jokes aside, let's see, a later position in the game. Because it turned out, because I had studied a yearbook survey, I knew the positions much better than my opponent, and actually, believe it or not, managed to outplay Steven Solray, 300 points above me, to get to a position let me find it. Yeah, I got to this position here. I think this is a good moment to take the game where I've got some advantage because I've got the bishop pair in an open position. I've got a passed pawn. But, Steven Solomon, at this time, he was the legend of endgame play for Australia. Even in this tournament, there were so many games he played where he won these drawn endings, quote-unquote drawn endings, or even these losing endgames from, in this tournament as such. And that was part of the reason, actually, how he managed to win the title in the end of Australian champion for 2008. And so, at this point, I was kind of well, okay, but I've gone through Van Perlo's endgame tactics, I've gone through Silman's complete endgame course cover to cover. Also, Ian was making sure to actually play out some of the important theoretical endgames with me, in some of the rook endgames, to make sure I was really solid there, and kind of understood what I was doing. At first, he was just, beating me every single time, it felt like, or I was making dumb mistakes, but it was, better to get the dumb mistakes out of the way then in the training than in doing an actual game, yes or yes. So in any case, my opponent played Queen F1, and it turns out to actually be a mistake. Probably should just play Queen E2 and sit on the position. In fact, it's a decisive mistake, apparently, because after takes, it turns out I have this very nasty move of Bishop F7, which I think just completely didn't occur to my opponent. Okay, it's also true that he was way behind on the clock as well. Well, maybe not way behind, but he was in time trouble, and we're getting close to the extra 30 minutes on move 40, this being move 36. And at this point, I made a decision that at the time I kind of had this very fixed kind of mindset of, okay, if I see move and calculate as being winning, I'm just going to play it. But now I'm kind of shocked, actually, in some ways, that I played the move Bishop D5. I think the reason I played it is I thought I was going to just win this pawn and somehow just win the game, and I just completely underestimated possibilities for my opponent. But, yeah, I mean, if I just play some move like Bishop H5 and, prepare to queen my pawn. I mean, it's not just that, but also Bishop D1. It's a little bit shocking to me that I didn't play this, and the only thing I could really think of is some sort of lapse in concentration or something like this in a way. It's really, again, quite a basic mistake even for a 2-150 player. But I mean, also maybe I was thinking after knight c3, maybe I was nervous that somehow he was going to round up my pawn, or maybe after knight a4 and c5 he has some counterplay, but actually it's nothing. I mean, if my king is able to get to the center, the thing is, my bishop cuts off his king, right? So it's actually just really, really good. And then my king gets in a lot faster, and if he does try to be direct, and I think this is what I was probably nervous about, if anything, c5. Probably what I just completely missed is that I can just play bishop to e8. And in that case, I don't have to do it immediately, but at the right moment, I can always take on a4, or maybe a better reason is just, bring my king to the center, and again, white struggles in really managing to get his king up. Like, even if he gets to g3, like, I can still cut him off with g5. Is a very nice example of domination, which I have to admit was not something that was really on my radar at the time. And, this element of domination not something I fully understood. I hadn't gone through my, Kasparian studies, as it were. But okay, bishop d5, I mean, it's sort of funny because actually, even though the position is like, I think my opponent must lost concentration at some point and he just assumed that it's a trivial draw. And yeah, if he plays, like, let's say g3 and puts the bishop here and king e2, yeah, this is an ironclad draw 100%. But I think my opponent just got kind of careless, and after king g7, bishop to e2, e3, so he's making sure my pawn's on a dark square for the easy blockade. But then at some point after king e5, yeah, king f3, king d4, and I think he just thought it didn't matter, right? I think he just believed, okay, well, I don't have to play to move h3, because if he takes the pawn, like, what difference does it make? Well, maybe my opponent was also nervous about something like king to c3, but it actually turns out not to be that effective, in fact. Like, king takes, well, we'll kind of see why, actually, in the game, because it ends up being a very similar situation, but if white finds this move of bishop e2, which I think is what my opponent had overlooked, then the point is, like, if a4, he can go bishop d1, and he's sort of able to get the bishop there, like, just in time to be able to stop the pawn, like, here, king d3, and, once the king gets here, it's like, it's obvious it's just a draw, yeah? Like, even if you took the pawn off the board, maybe it's still holding, but, well, I'm not so sure, because he played bishop b5, and this is where I actually missed a win in this position, where it's kind of like, I sort of thought that there were two moves, where there's one I've kind of felt, okay, I'm absolutely certain this is a win, and the one I was kind of, like, not so sure. So the obvious question, and I guess also relates to, like, what Jan Nepomniachtchi did in the match against Carlsen Game 6, the game of the year, was, well, what if Black just takes the pawn? And I think what I was nervous about at the time is I thought that he just goes king e2. He plays some move like bishop to a4, let's say, or, something like this in general. Or say king c3, bishop a4. And I mean, I just didn't really see a way to break through in his position. I thought it was just going to be a draw. But it's actually not the case. It turns out that I do have a win in this position. It requires a little maneuvering, but I believe that this does work. Where I can play like king to c2. And the idea is that he's actually in kind of a zugzwang, at least if I'm not mistaken. That if, let's say, well, actually that might not be 100% true. Maybe he has king e1 and he can, try to keep the defense like this. But even though Stockfish is saying, like, plus 8 and not giving, like, an instant win, it feels like this should be working somehow. Like, if I go h6, let's say I just play the engine's first line just to see whether it actually is enlightened or is just trolling me and testing my gullibility. But, I think that with this plan of bringing my king towards, I believe it's h4, I think this plan is winning. Let's check in just to make sure, because I don't want to be wrong about this. So let's say I go bishop to d6 just as an example, with the idea of bringing the bishop to c5. Well, that defends the pawn and clears the way for something like this, maybe. And if he goes, well, the thing is, like, he's in a bit of a zugzwang, I guess, to some extent. Well, maybe he can go bishop g6 and try to, stop me going king e4 and king f4. Because, I mean, if I go king f3, I just go king c3 d2, right? So his king is kind of stuck in place to some extent. Because if I get my king to f4, I think it's an easy win. But if king to e5, like, what if he goes king to f3? Like, this is where I'm a little bit stuck in figuring out how Black actually wins from this position. Because, I mean, like, let's say I play, I don't know, king to d5 or some move like bishop b6, just some waiting move. Well, I think maybe this is the key point, that this is sort of the zugzwang position. Because if he plays bishop to f7, I believe I can now play to move king to d4. And the point of that is that he kind of has to go king e2, because if he doesn't, I go king d3, or say if he goes bishop g6, I go king c3, and I either take the pawn, or I go king d2, e2, and I win. Yes or yes. So on that basis, I mean, instead... Actually, I should explain this a little bit, that the point is that at some moment I'll be able to go h5 and g4 and basically, trade off his bishop for my free pawns and then win the ending from there. This is just to make that point really clear. And if instead he does, let's say, if we take this position, let's say he plays some move keeping the bishop on this diagonal, like bishop to c2, for example. Maybe bishop h7 might be a better example, possibly. But if he goes bishop h7, then yeah, I can just play, the move h5 is now a possibility that becomes available. that wasn't possible earlier. And, you know, if I get the pawn at h4, you know, that pawn is deflecting his king away so that I can, you know, trade off my 2 pawns for the bishop and win. But if he takes, I just go g4, and once again you see that once I get these 2 passed pawns like this, and his bishop is not in the right position, then I basically just win, yeah? King e2, because obviously he has to stop g2 and queens, yeah? But g3, and you see that he doesn't have bishop e4 to boot a blockade, because his bishop is just out of place and my king covers it. This is very important, and, well, if king f3, I can simply push 1 pawn, and then the other, and, you know, I'm just going to queen and win the game. Unfortunately, I didn't see this, but it's actually very instructive to see why the move king c3, at least according to my analysis at the time, is actually not enough to win. Because I thought that this was winning as well. I thought, okay, his bishop is not able to stop my pawn queening except by giving itself up for it, and so I will be able to win in that way. But it turns out there's a move h4 that is really strong, and even the computer actually doesn't completely get it at first, because it says, oh, gh4 and black is winning, but of course, it's just going to be a simple case of the, you know, the wrong rook's pawn as such. Like, when this bishop gets traded, you know, well, I'll just keep his king here, and it's just going to be a draw, as is shown by the fact the intrinsic valuation is not going up drastically from this position, but, you know, just stuck at this, like, plus 2.91 and not changing, as it were. So I played h6, you know, keeping that tension, trying to keep a g-pawn, because a g-pawn, bishop versus king, will be enough to win. And actually, it was a miscalculation on several levels, because actually even hg5 is enough to draw. But Solo came up with this really nice idea of h5, where instead of trying to, let's say, you know, just try and have a solid draw, he's even trying to say, well, maybe I can try to play for a win. And I played this move bishop f8, kind of realizing it, okay, I don't want to get swindled like all his other opponents, so let's just, you know, defend the pawn. And then after king e4, like, instead of going a4 and kind of going down this rabbit hole of, you know, say he plays like bishop to c6 or bishop d7, like something like this, I was kind of a little bit nervous that I would end up in some situations I have to a2 take, where, I mean, his king is kind of coming in, and, you know, suddenly he can, you know, try to grab this pawn and have this outside pass pawn while my king is in the middle of nowhere. Like, okay, it turns out it's not really anything in reality. Like, I can, you know, play like king c4, and I mean, my king does get back in time as such. Like, I can go, you know, bishop d2, or I think even king d5 is, you know, is good enough as well. But yeah, like, I didn't want to kind of sort of take the risk when I was low on time, yeah? So I thought, let's just play it safe and just make sure I hold the solid draw. And so I played king c3, realizing that, you know, if I keep my king kind of following his, it will stop him from, you know, being able to take the pawn in time and just liquidate everything. And in the end, yeah, it just ended up being a draw, like king f4. King f7, yeah, he did manage to win the pawn, but it was a line where I'd seen that my a pawn is fast enough and that I can force him basically to kind of trade off my pawn for his, so that, you know, after take, you know, I can just bring my bishop around and, in the worst case, trade off my bishop for his pawn for an automatic draw. And that's why, you know, here I think I offered a draw and he accepted. So yeah, that was this game. I know I spent, again, a lot of time talking about it, but it shows, like, the elements of how some of my endgame state actually helped me to outplay my opponent, because he didn't assess the trade of queens correctly. Like, maybe you're thinking, oh, if I just get him into an endgame, I'll be able to outplay him. But it actually was a decisive mistake. And yeah, if I'd played a little bit better, I could have actually won this game. And, you know, considering that Solo only finished, let's say, yeah, my chair just suddenly, like, went up quite a lot just then. It's a little bit temperamental like that. But, like, basically, if I had won this game, like, you could say that if all of our results for the remaining rounds were the same, because, frankly, we kind of would have played similar opponents regardless with the way the tournament was panning out. Well, I mean, it's possibly I might have well tied for first with him, you know, and I would have got my first IM norm, so this was definitely a big turning point of the event, where I kind of went from, you know, just, like, winning and crushing everybody to being sort of bogged down in these draws against these much higher-rated players. But okay, draw against higher-rated players is still a very good result. Like, we shouldn't, you know, knock the fact we got a draw against a high-rated player. Like, still it boosted our rating up a bit, and we learned something from the experience, and, you know, that's kind of a experience I found myself. Like, sometimes you've got to learn how to draw with some high-rated player before you learn how to beat them. It's just all part of the process, so keep that in mind when you're in your preparation, because one thing that held me back sometimes was I was trying too hard to win even against the higher-rated players, whereas with this approach, kind of playing more solid and kind of letting them feel the pressure of, you know, me making it as hard as possible for them to win, and then letting them kind of make mistakes trying to overpress, like, that was a big turning point for me, and also for those who in Australia, like, you know, like Anton Smirnov, he was like another player, like in a later generation, who was very good at playing as sort of just being solid and letting his opponents kind of overpress when he was rising up the ranks. Like, then we held a lot of draws against me in this kind of way, even before he caught up to me in rating. But in any case, this next game is one where I was playing the top seed Dejan Antic, and okay, this was another one as an example. I'd prepared some kind of special sort of idea using a yearbook survey, because I was playing the Bogo Indian as my system if they avoided the Nimso, and after bishop b4, I had prepared this line with queen e7, so I was following the lead of Daryl Johansson, who an Australian grandmaster who at that time was like Australia's leading expert on the Bogo Indian. It was like his main system against 1d4 for a long time. And so I had looked at his games and picked up some ideas, but at the same time I also came up with some ideas of my own. So for example, after knight to c3, I think if I remember correctly in the repertoire book that I was using, I think it was called Chess Openings for Black Explained, you know, I think they were recommending this approach of going d6, knight c6 and e5, like just the main line, very systematic. But at the time I didn't really like this move of d5. I think I'd had some blitz games against IMs and I think even a GM as well, where I just got kind of just outplayed. Like, I tried different moves, like putting the knight on b8, I tried putting the knight on d8, but somehow I didn't really find anything that was to my satisfaction. And so what I did was I kind of found my own weapon, and I saw this survey, I think it was by Emil Anker, if I remember correctly. I could be completely misremembering, but it was one of these like Hungarian IMs, I think, where they showed this idea of playing a5. And a5, like, is a move that's not really better than the move d6 by any means, but it kind of is discouraging d5 to some extent, because you can go like knight b4 and, you know, try to do this sort of thing. Granted, modern computers think that it's just rubbish and that d5 is just much better for white, but, you know, Dayan was a little bit surprised by this, and again, I was sort of better prepared than my opponent, because I had gone that really deep route of actually going through a lot of games in the position, like analysed games in those yearbook surveys, and of course, it's true the yearbook surveys may be a little bit outdated nowadays with chess engines and the database being so available to everyone, but still, like, the way in which one masters the openings is definitely like a good model in terms of, you know, these books and how they approached it with the surveys. So my opponent played castles, and I got to demonstrate the main idea of playing a5, that now the difference is that the move d5 is arguably less effective when I've played a5. This was my logic at the time, because of knight b4, a3, and knight a6. I'm kind of saying that, well, because I got in this knight b4, I made you play this a3 move that is not that useful. Now, granted, modern computers kind of say, okay, this is not really true, that, you know, after d6, fe6, which is what happened in the game, that if white plays some move, like, let's say, rook e3, or even indeed the move knight d4 in the game, like, if my opponent plays the move of rook to e3 in this position, you know, to the idea of going f4 and use his lead development, then yeah, white is probably quite significantly better, and, you know, this is one reason why, you know, there are limitations to playing these shortcuts, but I think it's quite instructive to see that I was able to get to a 2-300 plus level, even, like, without playing openings that were really the recommendation to computers, and how I was able to find my own ideas to kind of play to my own strengths and get my opponents into some more unfamiliar territory. Of course, now that the engine's a lot stronger, you're in a much stronger position to do that, because the realm of what we understand as being playable systems with both colours is much, much greater than it was back at this time when the engines were only, let's say, 2900-ish strength, as it were. Or, yeah, like 2900, 2950. So anyway, my opponent didn't notice, and the result was after knight b5. I think I had studied this position before, and I kind of remembered that this a4 was a really important move in such positions, where you fix the queen side, and it also sets a nice little trap that if they do play the move queen to a4 at this point, then you actually have c6, and suddenly the knight is not able to move anywhere, because you don't have, you know, knight d6 supported by the queen. So in that way, I was able to kind of have a pretty solid position, and okay, it is true that later my opponent did outplay me a little bit later in the game. Like, for example, I'm not sure if bishop f5 is the most precise, but okay, it wasn't terrible either. You know, he tried to go f4 and create some chances, but I was just able to keep a very solid position, and actually, to be fair, f4 is probably a mistake, and if I had played it better, I would have actually, you know, had an advantage from this point. But, you know, he kind of was like, you know, we kind of went back and forth, like I outplayed him for a move, then he kind of outplayed me for a move. And then in the end, we got this rook ending, I think, around, yeah, it was around this point where, you know, he's a pawn up, but I'm kind of like, have a lot of piece activity. You know, my rooks are quite active, and, you know, they're also the pawns are kind of getting hoovered off the board. And while my defense wasn't absolutely perfect, still I was able to play like rook d4, which, yeah, it's not the first choice of the engine. The engine wants to sack a second pawn even with king f7 for activity. But he played like f5, and I kind of realized like that this position, there are just so few pawns on the board that, like, realistically speaking, like, there's not many winning chances. Although, admittedly, I did make the sort of mistake, like, not an objective one, but I kind of did offer 2 draws in worse position, because I kind of didn't have the, I guess, fury of mind at the time to realize that just because I know for certain it's a draw doesn't mean that he knows that I know for certain it's a draw, and that was actually something itself I kind of learned from this game of, like, the importance, like, playing on, like, don't just agree a draw just because it's a drawn position, but, like, keep the game going if you've got any chance. But to be fair, this position is, like, pretty balanced. Like, he can't really get his rooks around to back rank mate me, and even if he could, like, rook h6, I've got it covered. And after trying for another, like, 30 or so moves, and me just confidently, you know, showing good defensive technique, yeah, we ended up agreeing a draw. So it shows the power of being well prepared, and I think a interesting takeaway you can have from this video that sometimes, like, especially below the master level in my experience, how well you know the position, how well you understand it, and how comfortable you feel are maybe more important factors than the sort of evaluation that the engine gives. Now, I don't recommend that use as an excuse to play, let's say, the Black Mardima Gambit, for example, because this is a rubbish gambit and you're going to just lose if you play this against good players in general. But it's still, like, you can use it to kind of give yourself the permission to not play the engine's first move intentionally so you get a position that you like better. You know, if it's, like, only a small difference where maybe, say, it's black, you're only a little bit worse versus, like, having 0-0-0 equality, then sure, go for it. In any case, moving on from that, the final round game I played, so, of course, I've had this really great tournament, and, you know, despite having that slow start of, you know, well, slowly, relatively speaking, of 2 losses as black against the 2 300-ish rated players, well, still I'm in this position where I'm playing white in the last round against another very strong junior player. In fact, I believe he was the top junior in Australia at that time, Moulton Lee. And so this was a situation where I think if I win the game, then I get an IM norm. I don't remember if he was eligible for an IM norm with a win as well, but I think that might have been the case because he was also having quite a good tournament. In fact, it actually was rated over 2-300 at the time, so it just shows you, like, the difference I could make. Like, you know, that he was kind of, in those 2 years where I was stuck at 1800 and, like, not really making any progress, he just, like, surged way ahead from, like, 1900-ish all the way to, like, 2-200, and, well, you know, I had to play catch-up, you know. But, you know, it's also like, you know, so, like, what matters not where you start, but where you finish, and, well, we both ended up becoming grandmasters, so it all worked out in the end. Anyway, in this last round game, he actually kind of hit on one of the little weaknesses I had in my repertoire at the time, and you know, after this game, actually, I remember that there were so many games that I was playing, like, against some of the Canberrans, for example, where they were playing, like, these kind of modern systems, and I think it was because they knew that I liked to play the Samish King's Indian, so they were kind of delaying knight f6, trying to get me out of a Samish and try to, say, make me play, I don't know, knight f3 or something, so that then they could play, for instance, something like knight d7, and, you know, it's a position where, okay, this sort of classical King's Indian is, of course, objectively quite good for white if he knows what he's doing, like bishop e3, etc. But, of course, like, if you haven't ever played this with white, if you only know the steps of f3 as I did at the time, then, of course, this is not really a great outcome in terms of being comfortable in the position, yeah? So I played a move knight g2, which is actually a pretty good move as well, and, you know, when I was recording my play g6 like Ikara course recently, this was one of the lines that was a bit of a headache, quite frankly. Okay, it was a different move order because it was knight c6 and then e5, but since Moulton played knight c6 in the game, it did transpose. And after d5, knight c7, I think that the engines were not really developed enough at the time to appreciate how powerful moves like h4 are, you know, just using this. And I think at the time I was a bit hesitant to play such moves because I think well, probably the idea just didn't occur to me, quite frankly, because I hadn't developed that level of understanding to appreciate the power of the rook's pawns moves. It is something, at least before the Alpha Zero times, I considered a very grandmasterly kind of concept. Just like, I was aware of the idea, but I didn't know when to apply it correctly, yeah? But in any case, I played bishop to e3, and, you know, I think I actually got a pretty good position out of the opening, even though I didn't play it absolutely perfectly. Like, h3, for example, is a move that at the time I sort of felt was a little bit, like, I don't want to have to play it, but I just wanted to stop, like, any counterplay of knight g4. If I have modern engines, actually sort of don't hate the idea. And I think, like, if you play it with g4, then actually it's kind of decent. But yeah, my opponent, yeah, he played a6, and it was kind of, it was a bit of a weird game, quite frankly, because, well, I played queen d2, like, apparently it's not the best square for the queen, like, probably there were better plans in the position. Computer wants to play a4, but to me that's a move I would never have really considered seriously, because I would have thought a5, and now how am I going to get in b4 and c5? But apparently the idea is that you can even play c5 anyway and kind of, you know, have it in a better version. But this was something that was, yeah, way beyond my understanding at this time. Like, if you had shown it to me, like, afterwards at this time, I would have just, like, I don't believe you, like, this is, like, completely anti-positional. But it does have a logic when you think about it, I guess. So after queen d2, maybe my opponent was nervous that if he were to castle in a position like this, that maybe I go g4 and kind of try to attack him. It's sort of hard to say. Also true, I did actually both miss a tactical opportunity where we both missed this b5 move. Kind of using the fact that, you know, this knight is stuck defending the pawn. That would actually have given him very good counterplay here, but okay, he didn't see it and I didn't see it either. After h6, I played this a3 move, which already kind of tells you I didn't really know what I was doing. Though fine enough, a3 is actually not that bad of a move. I think my idea is I want to prepare b4 and c5, but kind of anticipate a5 was sort of my thinking. So he goes f4. We have this sort of King's Indian with cards reversed, but this is where my weakness at the time of preparing moves I could have just played immediately starts to come up. You see, I think that in this kind of position, well, actually, maybe I'm being a bit harsh, because the move I played knight c1 is actually the first move of the engine, funnily enough. But nowadays, if I had this position, I would just play c5 in a heartbeat, because if you're not playing c5, like, how are you making progress on the queen side? And when you play such a move, you also, basically, it just opens up so you know exactly how to follow it up. You know, if they play takes, well, that's itself a very good structure. You can meet c6 with d6 for protected passed pawn. Or otherwise, you have ideas like castles long, knight c1, putting the rook on c1. And this was idea actually I did know at the time of this game. So yeah, knight c1, it goes knight g6. And yeah, somehow my play is just very, very slow. Like, knight d3 is kind of silly when I can just play c5. And actually, I remember after I played knight d3, I kind of realized, oh, I could have just played c5 immediately. Knight d3 was superfluous. And then when he plays b6, I'm kind of like, oh, well, now I need to make up for it. And I play like b4 and, you know, try to get in c5 really fast. But then he just kind of built this solid formation with rook f7. And it was kind of like, I feel like this position has got to be winning for me somehow, but I just have absolutely no idea how, in a sense. And it turns out probably what I should do is I should, you know, not kind of try to find a forcing continuation. Like, I think that pressure of, like, playing for my IM norm for the first time, like, going this tournament, like, if you told me I was playing for an IM norm last round, like, I would not have believed it, quite frankly. But, you know, that was kind of the situation I was at. But I kind of chose the wrong plan. Like, for example, one thing I didn't really understand until he was already kind of a lot of counterplay I did out of necessity is that a move like c6 is actually kind of annoying for black in this sort of position. Yeah, on the one hand it closes the position, but it also kills this bishop. And by killing this bishop, I'm also killing his rook from the king's side. So it means that, like, let's say he goes h5 and he's opening up the king's side. It means that the opening of the king's side is actually in my favor now. That actually I want to play moves like f takes g4 and open it up. Because what's going to happen is that his king is going to be a lot more exposed than mine in the long term, based on the fact that he's not able to get the a8 rook in the game. It's like I'm a rook up on this side of the board. But again, I have to admit, this is not something that I understood at any level whatsoever at the time of this game. And, well, there are also other moves as well. Like, for example, I should have just played cb6. And quite frankly, I'm not sure why I didn't play cb6. Like, probably I was nervous about, like, his, you know, knight coming in and maybe getting counterplayed under c-file. But once you see the idea of b5 and bring the knight into this c6 outpost, or if they try to lock it up to go knight b2, which I think, because I think I considered this idea of takes in b5, and I just thought, well, if he goes a5, I can't break through. And what I didn't realize is after knight b2, I'm just going here and I'm just completely killing black on the queen side. Like, it's just kind of obvious I'm winning in such a position. Because like, even in the worst case, I could always open up the king side if I absolutely had to, like, if they put every single piece on the queen side, but frankly, that probably isn't even going to be necessary to win here. So yeah, if I'd found this, I'd probably win the game and I get my first IM norm, but unfortunately I misplayed the position. My technique wasn't so good. And but later on I end up going for like this sort of very ambitious piece sack where like I'm probably, I'm still much better even here actually if I take and go king d1. Like, I was very nervous around playing some g3 and, you know, killing my bishop, but actually it's not that bad because I am still able to go like king c2 and try to get things moving along. Like at the right moment go a5 or something. But okay, I sort of assumed he had a fortress, and, you know, maybe actually he does have a fortress. Feels like sort of position where the engine just doesn't get it. Because I don't actually have a way to use that open h file when the g1 bishop is locked. But yeah, instead I played a5, and I kind of felt like if I don't make some push now, I'm not going to have a chance to win the game. So I thought, okay, let's just play knight b5 and, sack the piece and at least force a immediate confrontation. And I mean, tonight did, and if black doesn't play it precisely, yeah, maybe I can get in b5, b6 and just win. So it does force him to find some good moves, but he was up to the task. He played, move g3, which at first sight looks extremely anti-positional. But then he goes knight h4, and I kind of realized, okay, this is actually a little bit tricky to deal with. He's going for, like, knight h7, knight g5, and he's going to have some sack at some point. Okay, it's true, probably knight h4 is not the best execution, and I do have some advantage, but somehow I missed a little bit of a trick where I think if I play a move like queen e2, or for example, just kind of making sure there isn't going to be some knight e4 or this kind of sack, I'm probably, can still play for a win, but instead I went bishop f4, and I kind of just allowed too much counterplay. Actually, it turns out even bishop h3 is actually a trick in this position, which I think neither of us saw in the game. Like, we're both getting a little bit low on time at this point. And I believe the point of it is as follows. That if white were to, let's say, play g takes h3, well, yeah, black will just go knight f3, and, material is equal, but these pawns are way better than my pawns, to say the very least, after knight f4, f3, f2 sort of stuff, or g2 even. So, of course I don't have to take, but then, have to play some move like queen d3, and you're letting black kind of take, and, get his sort of, give back the material, but kind of get a good position in a sense, with these passed pawns over here. But he goes queen f6, and okay, I miss my chance to go b5, like I should just go b5 and just queen my pawns, because I can't really stop his play anyway. At the time, I think I thought I could play rook a2, and I thought that I had all the time in the world to build up the position. If I was going to do this, I really should have put the rook on a3 to cover f3, because now we play knight e4 and f3, and with this breakthrough, he basically gets enough counterplay to get the draw, as it were. Because obviously I take everything on f3, I lose the rook on h1 at the end of that fork. And so the way the game ended was g takes f3, and, what I had missed is that, he doesn't have to play knight f3 and, give me the advantage, but he has this move at g2, and that basically ensures him the draw. So after knight g2, queen f3, I realized that if I don't accept the draw, I actually just lose. So queen b3, queen to c2 again, this is the only move, and, we end up having a draw by repetition as such. And also, anyway, it's a game that both of us wanted to win, because, hard to say, like, basically we had to win this game to have a shot at the, a tie for first for the Australian Championship title, because in the last round, Tomek Ray was playing with white against Stephen Solomon, and Tomek was actually winning, but he ended up blowing it, and in the end, well, hard to say, like, in the end, Solo ended up winning the title with, I believe, 8 out of 11, if I am not mistaken. It was either 8 or 8.5, I mean, it was in this range, but yeah, he got the Australian Championship title, and, well, I had certainly had a breakthrough performance, and had got to this, basically shown I was basically playing at this 2-300 plus level. Performance rating in the event was in the low 2-400s, because, you need a 2-450 performance rating again in National Master Norm, and I'd played strong opponents and was only half a point off it. So definitely a great result, and it was really the kind of culmination, like all this work I'd been doing in my coach at the time, Ian Rogers, that really helped me to get to that next level, and, it's just, well, I really hope that me sharing these experiences so candidly, like both the elements of my training that I did that got me to this skill level and executing some of these ideas, to some of the things that were holding me back either before this tournament or even sometimes during this tournament. I think that it's given you a lot of clarity in regard to how to kind of work on these areas yourself, and just how to be more aware of these different weaknesses that you might have in your game, these little things that might be holding you back. Because, like, maybe you're already at, let's say, a master level, like 200 plus in, I don't know, attacking play and the initiative, but maybe your strategic understanding is only at a 2000 level, and that's what's kind of letting you down in your games. Or it might be like you're sort of a decent calculator, but you're very bad at managing your time, so you're ending up in time trouble all the time and blowing, the good positions you're getting as a result. Obviously, your main challenge is going to be different depending on your situation, right? But the answers are still there based on learning from other people's experience and knowing what is right for your own situation, and that's really where the power of coaching comes in to guide you on that process, not to tell you point blank this is the answer every single time, but to help you find the right answers for yourself so that you can get that fast progress and, do the right things for your situation, as it were. So on that note, if this video really resonated with you and you do want to take things to the next level, then you're always welcome to reach out to me on Messenger to kind of discuss what the way forward is. I will say quite blankly, like, that my programs like are very elite and like very, you know, like top quality stuff. So I mean, it's not like, you know, you're going to the $2 shop and like buying something on discount. This is like you're gonna pay for it, but you're gonna get the results as such. That's the idea. You know, I don't want to see you spend like how to say, like to be doing the wrong things with your chess and like, you know, somehow the mask just keeps getting further and further away and somehow you never achieve it. Like, that's not what I want for you. I want you to get it as fast as you possibly can, and sometimes you just need someone to kick your ass and tell you what you got to do and keep you accountable to do it. So if that's you, let me know. And also put in the comments below like what your main challenges with your chess, because I'm interested to like read that and to learn more about your situation as well. You know, if a lot of people have the same weakness, it means it can be a good idea for a video in the future to really help you guys out. In any case, glad you enjoyed this one, and I will see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.